Welcome everyone, this is Honest Restart, and this time we're going to be questioning as to the real reason why the sequel to Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild has been delayed. Now some of you may be thinking, well, they told us the reason this game is being delayed to spring 2023 is because they are expanding upon the world of Hyrule in Breath of the Wild and also adding new mechanics and interactions. That is definitely implied, and that could very well be the case, but there are other factors involved here that I want to discuss and go over, because they could also be reasons as to why Breath of the Wild 2 has been delayed. So that's what we're talking about today. Now before we jump into things, let me first very quickly talk about my social media. You may see a few different things here on screen. You can check that all out. It is linked in the description below. And of course, if you like what you're seeing here, you can subscribe or perhaps consider joining as a member. In the English version of the update trailer, Aonuma says, "However, we have decided to extend our development time a bit and change the release to spring 2023. And then it's not specifically stated why. There's an apology, he eventually shows some new gameplay, and he talks about how they're expanding upon the world of Hyrule beyond just the skies and the grounds, and there's also discussion of new mechanics and interactions that are being implemented, but it's not explicitly stated that the reason this game is being delayed is because of these new mechanics and additions and such." And then a little bit later into the update, Aonuma does talk about how the team is continuing to work diligently, so please be patient, or please wait a little while longer. I'm paraphrasing here, but the point is, there is not an explicit reason given as to exactly why the game is being delayed. Again, as I suggested earlier, you can very easily say, well, it's clear. He's implying very heavily that the reason they're delaying this game is because of the expansion of the world beyond the skies and the grounds and more so, and the new mechanics and interactions and such. And perhaps that's all there is to it. That can be a lot. There's a lot there. From what we've seen so far of Breath of the Wild 2, honestly, you could argue it's just a DLC expansion, but they've been working on this game longer than they were working on the original, so surely they have a lot behind the scenes that they're working on. There's going to be some big significant changes here, and it looks like they're being pretty ambitious because with how long they've been taking to make this game, they probably are trying to do a lot to make this game feel like a fresh new experience as opposed to just a straight up sequel or DLC expansion to Breath of the Wild. We do know that with the original Breath of the Wild, one of the main reasons why the game was delayed was because they were trying to get the physics engine working a lot better. They were having a lot of complications with that. It's a fairly sophisticated engine. And with Breath of the Wild 2, we do know there's a lot of new mechanics that they're trying out from what we've seen already, and obviously there's a lot more that they haven't shown us, and all of these different things can create a number of other complications and possibilities with this physics engine, which is pretty complex as it is, so surely that's going to take a lot more time to work on there. So that could be a big reason as to why the game has been delayed. They're simply working on polishing it up, getting in as many gameplay possibilities as they want, because they have a huge, beautiful vision for this game, and that could be it. But what if it isn't? Something I've noticed is that this is an eerily familiar situation to what happened with the original Breath of the Wild. The original Breath of the Wild had an update trailer delaying the game as well. They put out a little video similar to this one announcing the delay of the game. And now this time, March 2022, they put out an update trailer, even though the game is slated for 2022, saying that they're going to have to delay the game a little bit and it'll be coming out spring 2023. And usually when Nintendo has a spring date for a big game, that means just before the end of the fiscal year, which would be March of the following year. And we've seen a lot of big games coming around then, like Animal Crossing, Monster Hunter, Kirby, Breath of the Wild. So it's looking like Breath of the Wild 2 is also going to be coming out in March, except this time, March 2023. So it's a very similar situation. And what happened with the initial Breath of the Wild is that yes, they delayed the game a couple times. One time because of the physics engine, but the other time was because they were trying to get both versions optimized and ready. Both versions because there were going to be two different versions. One for the Wii U, one for the Nintendo Switch, which at the time was not announced yet. Now, I personally have not been expecting new hardware as early as the beginning of 2023. I've been thinking at the earliest, holiday 2023. And now, more recently, based off different things that have occurred, I've been thinking maybe even 2024, sometime then, but the very earliest, early 2023. But still, this situation is very similar. It's eerily similar. And it should also be noted that typically, when Nintendo has new hardware, what they use to push this new hardware, usually, there are exceptions, but usually, it's a new Legend of Zelda. When the Nintendo Wii launched, Twilight Princess. When the Nintendo Switch launched, Breath of the Wild. When the Switch Lite launched, Link's Awakening Remake. So perhaps the real reason they are delaying Breath of the Wild 2 is because they have new hardware coming out early 2023 and they want to optimize a version of Breath of the Wild 2 that runs and looks better on this system so it could really push this new system. Whether that's a mid-gen refresh or a Switch 2 or what have you, this new hardware perhaps may have improved visual fidelity and such, and they want Breath of the Wild 2 to be the big showcase for that. That could have something to do with this situation. Another consideration, and perhaps an obvious one, is that the effects of the pandemic still linger with the development for Breath of the Wild 2, and rather than things being delayed by a year, perhaps it's been delayed even longer, and they just thought they might be ready when they made the announcement last year, but they really aren't. Zelda games typically are delayed because they are such huge ambitious projects by Nintendo, and Onuma and the Zelda team are always trying to push and make it better and better, and oftentimes they come up with new ideas and they are more willing to delay the date because they think they can make the game a better version of what it could be. And that's simply what's happening again, because this is what the Zelda team does. They delay things even though they already had a date in mind for what they initially thought they could do. Something else to consider here is that we have heard of Nintendo holding back games in the past. Mario Odyssey, for example, apparently was ready in early 2017, but they simply sort of saved it and optimized it throughout the year so it could come out as a big holiday release back in 2017. And there are other projects that we've heard about in the background for years, like Skyward Sword, Metroid Prime Trilogy, perhaps Pikmin 4. So it may be the case that Nintendo sees this situation of all these games that are coming out and that are actually going to be ready for 2022, and they're thinking, well, while we could probably push Breath of the Wild 2 to come out for the end of this year, we don't need to. We have Pokemon Scarlet and Violet, we have Xenoblade Chronicles 3, we have Metroid Prime Remake and other things that will be ready, so we'll simply rely on those and we'll give them the proper space they deserve and need, and we'll let Breath of the Wild 2 have the spotlight March 2023. That's another possibility here. It simply may be that they have decided that they can just spend their time polishing the game up, not rushing, not suffering, and then allow everything else to sort of enjoy the breathing room in 2022. Or maybe it's a combination of all of these things. Perhaps they don't think they need it, so they're not going to force it. Perhaps there are ideas that they've come up with that they want to improve upon, and perhaps there is also new hardware coming out, and all of these things will come to fruition spring 2023. If I had to guess, I would say that I still feel like it's kind of unlikely that new hardware is coming out at the beginning of next year. But who knows, maybe they'll delay Breath of the Wild 2 again, and if Breath of the Wild 2 gets delayed to like the end of 2023, for example, or like to the second half at some point, then I can far more easily see the game coming out alongside new hardware. Or maybe Nintendo is simply picking up the pace here and coming out with this new hardware sooner than later. We don't know. Either way, though, I think the most safest assumption is that they are improving upon the game, as it's clearly inferred by the update trailer, and there may be other reasons, but that is probably the biggest reason. But we'll see what happens. What do you guys think is the real reason Breath of the Wild 2 is delayed? Let me know in the comments below. Anyways, everyone, this is On Just Restart. Thank you so much for listening and watching, and I'll see you all really soon. Take care. Bye.